Who is the best?
So good evening again. And now we come to the highlight of the day. LSTM is very fortunate. There are very few endowed Leverhulme lectures, and I think David Molyneux started this back in 1997 with Viscount Leverhulme. So we're very fortunate to have these lecture series, and it's one of the most prestigious events in LSTM's calendar. And I'm delighted to ask Paul, who's known David for 40 years, to introduce our speaker tonight.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And I'm delighted to be able to introduce David. David Nabarro, medical doctor, international civil servant and diplomat, special advisor to the UN on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and Climate Change. To date, a stellar, extraordinary career, but he's still advancing the agenda. And of course, one could argue that David's career started as senior lecturer at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, and he was one of the only staff member that had his basement a permanent dancing area to entertain master's students and at his house. And it was the only master's program at the time, and probably still, that had the race relations officer for Liverpool talking to master's students about race and inclusion in Liverpool. He moved from Liverpool to Diffid, where he ODA at the time as Chief of Health and Population, and tripled the health aid budget with Claire Short. He moved to WHO, set up and ran rollback malaria before Gates had even moved into the party. And then he did a lot of work with Brundtland, working in Baghdad and Iraq, as well as being executive director of the WHO at the time. And there's only one more sentence about your career. I was told not to talk too much about, but he was a coordinator to tackle avian flu, head of the UN response to cholera in Haiti, special envoy for Ebola, and latterly special advisor on sustainable development and climate change. And a busy person indeed, but David is a modest person who works by leading from behind and is a true diplomat. And this description of his career misses some of the most important qualities and impact of David in his support and development of others. I know, because he helped me. As a junior doctor in my 20s, I arranged to meet David at the London School of Hygiene when he was just back from Nepal from his master's. And he asked me what I wanted to do. I said, I want to go overseas to work, but first I want to complete my MRCGP, the higher degree in medicine. He said, don't do the MRCP. It will damage your brain. It will stop you thinking. Get jobs in busy district general hospitals. Learn skills, then you may be of some use. And then get out there. And so I changed my career and I moved to Stoke-on-Trent and really things, I took his advice and it was incredibly helpful. And you know, in the years that followed, David really helped me with advice, support, affirmation, and challenging me. So he helped me find my way in those early years. And he does that with many people. I was on a minibus recently this year with 15 other people going to an immersion in living health systems, which David's going to talk about, for sustainable development, run by Florence and David. And around me on this bus were some really quite influential people that had done many interesting things, but the one thing they had in common was a personal story about how David had helped them and steered them on the way. So I'm delighted to be able to welcome you.
Thank you, Paul. Actually, the joy with Paul was really meeting with him in Papua New Guinea and working with you then and being able to work with you since, and watching how you adapted your brain to what people need And as I watched you developing this program on systematic reviews and coming up with some of the really excellent material that's for people, I'm proud of you. And so thanks for these introductory words. Now, the title that I've chosen for tonight, Engaging in Complex Issues to Secure the Future, might appear a bit obscure, but I hope that during the next 20 minutes or so, you'll find that it makes sense. And it's a lecture that I haven't given before. It's new stuff. And if at any time you feel this guy's got lost, just shout out, okay? And catch my eye and shout out, because I'm very happy to stop and reposition myself, except if all the lights go out I can't see you, but I'll adjust. And because it matters, because the work that I want to talk about tonight is really about picking up on some of the things that David Dalou talked about earlier, related to how we tune in to the future and do it together. So what's coming? There's 8 headings, and I thought I'd give you the headings now and then take you through them. So this is the framing part, and there'll be a bit more of that. And then I want to share with you my own story about my journey, but particularly concentrating on the last 13 years, 14 years. And then I want to introduce you to the Sustainable Development Agenda and explain to you why it's my compass and what it means for me. Then I'm going to go into what some people refer to as Goal 2, which is the Sustainable Development Goal about zero hunger, and to talk about the new narratives that are developing on food. That's an example, because then using that example, I want to focus on the area of work that I'm most involved in, which is helping people to connect, helping them to get involved in dialogue, to discover what each other thinks and why, and then through dialogue to find that they actually have more in common than they thought. And so then there is some alignment, and then when there is alignment, the possibility of real shifts in the systems with which we're working. And that's going to be the centerpiece of my conversation. And then I want to lift out of that and say, what have we learned from some of these experiences about systems leadership, and particularly living systems leadership, as ways to navigate complexity, and then how can we take that in order to try to secure the future. And I'll explain very soon what I mean by that. And then the end is just going to be a bit of personal reflections. And I invite you just to be thinking, what do the initials LIL stand for? I'll tell you at the end. So here's the framing. For me, ever since I started working in public health, there were 4 words that really mattered to me. One was opportunity. Why can't everybody in the world have the same sort of opportunities as everybody else? Why do we have to create a world where opportunities are skewed? And then leading on from that, access. Why do some people, because of where they're born, have the capacity to access really amazing healthcare or amazing education or even amazing employment, whereas others just have no chance? And what can we do as a community to encourage equity, and then to build into that equity the notion that our finite planet needs regeneration in everything we do? So those are my four main words that I'm going to try to build around. And I'm going to refer to my work in public health, which Paul just described, the work we're doing on food systems, And then I'm going to, if we get a chance, perhaps at question time, talk a bit about climate. Because for me, climate is the ultimate defining issue of now, and it's changing super fast, and it requires attention from world leaders now. And so that's why I've been working a lot with the Secretary General of the UN on climate. What I'm talking about applies to everyone, all ages, all groups, all sectors. In fact, I actually want to try to erode as far as possible the divisions that exist because of generation, the divisions that exist because of ethnicity or class, and the divisions that exist between sectors. Because I'm going to try to make the point to you that this securing the future requires us to reverse that tendency for separation and fragmentation, and to learn that working together in a very constructive way is the only way to work when it comes to securing the future. And so here's the challenge. When David was talking just now in his interview, which I loved, it was a pity it was a bit short, but in a way the brevity made it more poignant. One of the things he said is our world is changing, and we have to make sure that we're relevant for that change. So I want to pick up on that challenge, and so I changed this slide after I heard you talk. And I'm going to say, can we actually organize ourselves so that we are able to influence the direction of change rather than being passive recipients of change? And can we make it possible to be the generation that influences change for the good of people everywhere, rather than for the good of a very small number of people who have a lot of assets and power? But most importantly, can we actually work for future generations rather than for the current generation? For those of you who've got children, I'm thinking of your children's children. For those of you who've not got children or are not in that department at the moment, I'm thinking of the children who might come. Because learning to work for the generations to come might be the most important attribute that we have to learn as leaders of the future. Not for now, but for the ones to come. Just think about it. Working for people who are going to be of your age in 50 years' time. I'll come back to it, but that's the structure. So a little bit about the journey. Now, I discovered when I came here this afternoon that there's a little issue with these screens, that they're small. And I hate to do this, but don't feel that you've got to screw your eyes up to read the words. I'll take you through it. My usual instruction to people is never ever have slides where the writing is too small to read, and I'm breaking that instruction. But that's the way it is. I was here between 1985 and 1989. Some of the people who I work with are in this room, and that's just a source of huge joy. I came here because the following thing happened. I was working in Nepal, and I was some way out of Kathmandu, and it was about 1981. And I heard that this amazing guy, who was really getting a fabulous reputation, called Kenneth Newell, was about to come to Delhi. And so I organized to come to Delhi, and then I got up at about 3 in the morning and went to the airport. And I stood there with a piece of paper saying, Professor Newell. And this guy walks out and, who are you? He had very big, bushy eyebrows, this guy, Kenneth Newell, was really quite stern, but he smiled the most gorgeous, warm smile when he met me. And he said, okay, we'll talk. And he said, as we got in a little taxi going from Delhi Airport to Claridge's hotel, he said, actually, yeah, I want 2 hours with you because I want to find out the shape of your head. And that was this guy. He taught me 2 things. He taught when you meet people, spend enough time with them, be curious about them, find out how they really see the world. And he taught me that really life is about systems. Nothing is ever linear. So it actually took a bit of time for us to work out how we would interact with each other, but shortly afterwards, it was a bit later actually, I was coming here to Liverpool, to the School of Tropical Medicine, and I was here between 85 and 89. And I think that my time here probably really set the foundations of an inquisitive, connecting mind that could never be stilled. And that was because the energy inside the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine is quite unlike energy in any other educational institution I've ever been in. It just hums with the collective positive energy of everybody, whether you're on master's courses or diploma students or in the staff rooms. And so I want to start by saying I am really grateful for this institution, for the university, for people like Professor John Ashton, who I met then and who's here tonight, for showing me that public health is not a technical discipline, it's a political discipline. And you can't do public health unless you're comfortable with engaging in politics, because it's about power. It's about who has power, who can use power to change their lives, or who doesn't have power and who is excluded and marginalised. I pay credit to David Molyneux. I don't know whether he's here. He was a fabulous leader and taught me so much about global health. Tim Martineau, who's sitting in the back, with whom I worked in Nepal and who came here to work in Ken Yule's department. And so there are many, many others that I want to refer to, but for me, that time here at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine opened my eyes to possibilities. So then I went between 1989 and 2013 to work in various institutions, to work for what used to be called the Overseas Development Administration, so I was in the Foreign Office, to work for the Department for International Development, and Paul referred to that. And there we were able to take health and link it to other specialisms to create a directorate for human development. And that was the beginning of what I was trying to do, to make certain that health was connected to all the other sectors that matter. And then I went on to the World Health Organization, and my tutor there was Gro Harlem Brundtland, who in the same way taught me as a political leader, being a doctor is fine, being a public health doctor is fine, but if you want to make a difference, start to work with the politicians. That's where the real progress happens. And after that, I did shift a bit, and I went to work with Kofi Annan in New York, taking public health into UN Secretariat. They hadn't done it before, and this was because the challenges of avian influenza and pandemics were beginning to really disturb a lot of governments. And so Kofi said to the person running WHO at the time, could you send over somebody to help me? And I was the one who was sent. And so we started to build a group inside the UN that was putting health inside the political envelope of the Security Council and the General Assembly. And then after working on pandemics, I began to have a reputation as somebody who could coordinate, who could bring different groups together. And I didn't realize at the time, but actually people will hunt you out and pull you in if you can coordinate people who normally are fighting and snarling at each other, and if you can actually get them to work together on an issue that really matters. And this was 2008 when food prices were rising. And then it was Ban Ki-moon, Korean, who was the Secretary General, and he said, I need somebody who can help us to find a way to position not just the UN, but actually the world's leaders in a place where they can take food seriously, because food was not in a good space. We had huge rises in rice prices because of manipulation of the market, huge rises in wheat prices because of climatic causes. And our job was to try to find a way to bring the whole of the UN and the World Bank and the OECD and a variety of other groups into a place where they could work properly on food. But together with colleagues, my job was to say, yeah, we can do that, but we do it through working with communities and countries, through listening to their realities, rather than simply setting global rules. So we did that on food. And then in 2010, the area needed attention was nutrition. So we had to do some work on that. And then it became a bit wider, and my responsibility was for developing the Sustainable Development Goals, and then trying to make sure that the Paris Climate Agreement got properly signed and put in place so that we could start to work on climate. I agree, things are not good in all those areas. We've got some that are going wrong. But I want to tell you that that ability to bring different organizations together is one that seems to me to have been quite useful. And I'm going to go into the food story in a bit more detail and use that as my example, and then out of the food story, take you with me on the new work that we're doing to actually help people to learn the skills that we were practicing, because we couldn't find any university or institution that was teaching them. Now, moving to 2012, some of you will know that between 2000 and 2015, there was a huge global effort to develop goals that all different development agencies could pursue in a systematic way in order to make a real difference to the well-being of people everywhere. And this led in 2000 to something called the Millennium Development Goals. There were 8 of them: maternal health, child health, primary education, water and sanitation. There was one thing that was particularly important about these. They were goals for the world's poorest nations and the poorest people. And they were incredibly effective, because they harnessed the collective energy of all the development agencies towards a number of clear objectives that had been endorsed by world leaders in 2000. In 2012, I was in Rio de Janeiro for something called the Rio +20 conference, together with Ban Ki-moon, and what we were looking at was, what did the world want to put in place for development after 2015. So remember, we had 2012. We had people like the British government who were saying the Millennium Development Goals were great, we just need to continue that way of working. But delegates from Brazil, from Colombia, from Indonesia, from India, were saying, no, actually we don't want the future of the world to be built around goals that are just about what happens in poor countries. Because actually the rich countries have got to shift even more than the poor countries. So let's have goals that apply to the world. And let's have goals that put the interests of people at the center. Let's have goals that recognize the interconnection of everything that goes on in people's lives. People do not divide their lives up into health, education, human rights. Everything is joined up. And so that led to 3 years of really hard work to develop this thing called the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. 8 million people around the world were asked their opinions. There were 60 meetings in different countries to devise this new agenda. And when the agenda started to appear, thanks to amazing mediation by a Kenyan and an Irish pair of ambassadors, people got mad. Why? Because they came out with this agenda that had these principles about people-centeredness, universality, interconnectedness, integration, and partnering. And that was completely the opposite of where we were with the Millennium Development Goals, especially the universality. And then they got mad for one other reason, that there were 17 goals. And the communications people, Diederik, where are you? Communications people said, 17? How can you market 17 goals? So we got a guy called Jacob Trollback to develop some nice icons and colors. And we said, well, let's at least make it a palette that people can believe. And then he developed this beautiful wheel that's become the trademark of the Sustainable Development Goals. But actually, when you look at this list of goals and when you read the document, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, these are amazing. And actually, there are 169 targets to go with these goals. And so what is this? It's actually the plan for the future of our world and her people. And it's the only plan there is. And given that we've only got one world, I think we have to take it seriously. So this is what I've been working on, both in the formation, and it's become my compass for life. It doesn't mean that I'm religious about it, it just means that I recognize that you can't just focus on the human issues that are in goals 1 to 6 without thinking about the economic and societal issues that are in goals 7 to 11. And then the planetary issues that are goals 12 to 15. And then the absolute need to be able to create systems in society for resolving conflict peacefully, goal 16. And none of this can be achieved without partnerships. Yes, there are things missing. There's not much in there about the internet. And that's always been a worry for people. But this is an amazing construction, and it was negotiated, as I say, by representatives of countries, endorsed by every world leader, and I think it's worth holding on to. So this is my compass. I expect it's compass for some of you. So then we're in 2015, and this agenda has been produced. And the Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, says, quite thoughtfully, David, I think there's a problem, and that is that when it comes to goal 2, we still haven't really worked out what the right design for food systems for the future is. And he said, if you actually look at food, that seems to be an issue that is relevant for all the goals. Could you pull together a group of leading actors from businesses, civil society, government and scientific institutions, simply to answer the question, what do we do about food when it comes to planning for 2030 and beyond? So, to cut a long story short, this group spent a couple of years in meetings working away and realized that there's no simple single pathway to sorting out what's done with food. And that's because if we look at food and its purpose, it seems to go 4 ways. First of all, you want to be sure that food enables everybody to be well-nourished and healthy. Second, you want to be sure that producing food doesn't destroy ecosystems, doesn't reduce the pollinators, doesn't empty aquifers, doesn't damage any aspects of the environment by fertilizer runoff. You want to be sure that food production actually enables the 500 million smallholder farmers in the world to earn a decent living and doesn't lead to farmer suicides, farmers selling up their property and migrating to cities, or farmers just giving up. And you want to make sure that the food production system isn't contributing to climate change. At the moment, it looks as though food and land use changes associated with food contribute around 30% of greenhouse gases. So actually, food is difficult. And actually, food has to be mended in a way that deals with all those areas and more. And there are many choices and trade-offs and a lot of people involved. And every food system has very much a local dimension. It's not a global issue. There are multiple food systems and they are local. So I basically decided, under the instructions from the Secretary-General, that we would find ways to try to sort out what's happening in food so that it could work better. Do you know that current economic analyses suggest that the total value of the world's food systems in asset terms is about $10 trillion a year? Current economic analyses suggest that the damage caused by food systems to human health, to the environment, to livelihoods and to climate has a minimal total cost for society of $12 trillion a year. There is actually something wrong with food systems and it needs attention. So, how do you deal with a problem when it involves hundreds of thousands of different organizations, when it affects the livelihoods of probably households that probably contain about 2.5 billion people, when it is leading to apparently about a third of the deaths in the world today? How do you deal with a problem of that magnitude when there's no single person or organization in charge? Well, what we decided, frankly, as a result of many, many people coming together, is that when you've got an issue where there is a lot of contest and a lot of dispute, the most important thing is to talk about it. And so a program called the Food Systems Dialogues has been developed by a group of organizations, NGOs, business organizations, and international partnerships. And these are designed to connect different actors together in a structured way, facilitated, safe spaces where people can say what they like without being caught, no tweeting during the moment, and having a red thread of emerging priorities through the discussions. So there have been 22 food systems dialogues around the world involving more than 1,300 practitioners, from CEOs of companies and government leaders to farmers and fishers. They've taken place on 6 continents in the last 15 months, in 18 countries, and they've come out with 10 major themes that have been collated together and are now being fed through to plans for a summit on the future of food, which is being convened by the UN Secretary-General in September 2021. There are 4 big themes that have come out through this work. And this is the only piece of substantive comment that I'm sharing with you as an example. I could have chosen examples from the climate space or the health space, but I wanted to show you this one. There are 4 big themes that have come out. One wants to link together wants to make sure that all efforts in the food arena have human nutrition and human health as a primary goal, i.e., stop producing and certainly stop subsidizing food that is contributing to the non-communicable disease epidemic, contributing to these 1/3 of deaths that are diet-related. put nutrition into food. It's not there. I'll tell you that straight. It's not there. So bringing together health people with agriculture people, with food retail people, and making certain that they are joined up is task one. Task two, if you're going to bring about changes in food, make sure that the people who are involved in the food system are at the centre of the discussion. Don't lock the farmers out. Don't ignore the fishers. Don't neglect the challenges faced by busy mothers who want to be able to discuss how they're going to feed their children. Make sure that everybody is there and able to be involved. It's so obvious when you're inside this space. And yet I go to meeting after meeting on food where no farmers are to be found, no fishers are to be found, and there's very little listening to women with small children. There's very little attention to the needs of very poor people who can barely afford decent diet in their homes. Third thing, people working in food can have a huge impact on the environment, farmers especially. But they're not going to change if they get told by governments, stop using Roundup, don't use fertilizer, stop using these kinds of seeds, because urban consumers are instructing their representatives to issue those kinds of edicts. They're going to say, hang on, we've been using these fertilizers for many years, and actually they're important for our production systems. Or, hang on, if we can't use weed killers and pesticides, we're in real trouble. It's really important that if we're trying to work with farmers on environmental and planetary change, that they are part of the discussion and not treated as objects. Why are French farmers protesting yesterday and today and complaining about their president? Why are Dutch farmers out on the streets and ramming their tractors into local authority houses? Why are British farmers threatening, if the Brexit exit terms are bad, that they will go on, they will do blockades because of serious problems in the lamb and dairy sectors? Because they're not being included in the discussion. That's the origin of the Gilets jaunes movement in France. And then fourthly, if we really want to see food systems change, we must talk to the investment houses like BlackRock that put hundreds of millions of dollars a year into food. Why are they putting money into food that is actually killing people? So this has come out of these discussions. We go off to have a meeting on Monday in New York with a lot of investment houses actually starting to ask the question, what do they want to be investing in? I reckon in 5 years' time, as a result of this process of dialogue and the red threads that are emerging, that we will see shifts occurring quite dramatically in how food systems work. You can see the green shoots already. So that's just one small example of trying to find a way to create momentum when there's no obvious leader and an awful lot of groups involved, done through facilitated dialogue. It's been super hard work, and it's still going on, but I think that it's starting to bear fruit. So I thought, together with a lot of colleagues, this is not me on my own, can we create just a way of describing this approach to navigating complexity, to connecting people so they try to find common cause, and doing it in a way that is politically informed? Doesn't mean one has to be a party politician. Certainly the UK food dialogues have been absolutely non-political in the party political sense, but immensely political in whether the power of the people to influence is there. Can we take this further? what have we been doing? So if you could start with the bubble that's at about 10 o'clock, I think, connecting intensively with curiosity. It's back to where I started when I was at Liverpool being taught by Professor Newell. Get into people's heads. Find out what they think and why. There's always a reason for it. Meet them there. That is the starting point. And then, because each person who you meet and talk to is part of a system or a series of systems, sense their systems through listening to them in their words and consulting them. This is so important. I mean, David was talking about it in his interview, but Bertie was also talking about it in the session earlier this afternoon, those of you who were there on TB in Malawi. You could feel that Bertie and his team have been really feeling into what's going on in Malawian communities and understanding how life looks from the point of view of the people of Blantyre and elsewhere. It's a skill, but everyone can do it. And a lot of people don't do it because they've not been encouraged to do it. And then there's the next step, which is when you actually start to bring people together who feel pretty much the same. And so you assemble networks with a common purpose. But there are three key words. One, identity, what we stand for. We're doing this work because we stand for the public good. We're doing this work because we want people everywhere to have the same opportunity. We don't have to walk around with a badge. Don't have to. We don't have to be intolerant of each other if they don't share our beliefs. We just find a supplementary identity on top of the identity we already have as a student at LSHTM or as chair of the Board of Governors or whatever else you are. I mean, I'm trying not to be silly and make mistakes. We just need the supplementary identity that defines what we're working for. And then in our networks, we actually pay attention to each other and to building relationships so that we can work together. And if we can focus on the identity and the relationships, then we can start to share not just information, but we can share our feelings and our anxieties, because that's what makes teams really work. Because out of those three words, identity, relationships, and sharing, comes trust. And when there is trust, we can move mountains. Of course, there will be times when we make mistakes and we break trust, but we're human and we can recover. Because then we can get into dialogues, we can explore priorities, we can find trade-offs in decision-making, and we can start to assemble the case for doing things differently. We can co-create narratives. Narratives are so important, that bind us together and find the pathways that frame the journey that we're on. And most importantly, as we're trying to build collectives of action, we do something absolutely vital. We cradle the process, which means that we provide safe containers within which people can find ways to work better together. There's a lot of that goes on Merseyside. It's one of the things that this city is famous for and this community is famous for. There's a lot of it happening in many other places, but actually, if we don't make the effort to create more and more cradles, people work in isolation, they fragment, they just spend their whole time saying, I don't agree with her or him for this or that reason, that we create the reverse of what we want. So by creating cradles, we can build collective efforts, and then the coalitions start to build and the movements are there. All of you will find examples of this way of working in your lives. All of you will know people who are really good at identity, relationships, and sharing, who are brilliant at cradling different actors together so that they will work differently. But unfortunately, this is not what is taught in institutions. It's not what we get marks for if we're in our annual appraisals, and it's often not what helps us to get the jobs that we're after, because these are sometimes referred to as soft skills, and they're seen as voluntary. But I'm making the point to you tonight, and it's my main message, that the soft skills of interpersonal working, trust building, are actually more important than the hard skills of whether you can do a good experiment in the laboratory or whether you can run a good field trial. Actually, you can't run a good field trial without these skills. We all know it, but nobody actually picks it out and names it. So we have, and we call it living systems leadership. And a guy called John Atkinson, who we work with, who's a disciple of a guy called Myron Rogers, has been our creative energy behind this, and Paul came along to one of the sessions, so that's why he referred to it. But this exists. And then we can start to say, well, we're complexity navigators. Sorry, am I going on too long, David? Okay, thank you, just checking. We can see ourselves as complexity navigators because learning to work in this way helps us to be comfortable with complexity, so that instead of saying problems are too complex for us to handle, so we'll go for the low-hanging fruit, we turn it round the other way. And we say the important problems are horrendously complex, but we're willing to embrace them because we have a methodology that will help us do it. We welcome different understandings. We value networks. We appreciate the potential of coalitions. We anticipate that new ways of doing things will emerge if we get this right. And to do this, there are three real attributes that we need. One, we're after equity. We're after fairness. We want the planet to be regenerated. We do not want 2 generations' time people to be saying, like Greta Thunberg says, you've stolen our future. We don't want that. We don't want to be stealing the future of coming generations. But to get towards the point where we're working for that future and securing it, we have to be into the political sphere. All this work is totally political, as I said at the beginning. Secondly, we will get despised for what we're trying to do, because this way of working challenges vested interests. It's just really unfortunate, but it's true. There are too many people who profit from the current skewed power relations, and if we're trying to get greater equity, we're going to face adversity. And then thirdly, we never know whether we're doing any good. This is my big nightmare, even now. Am I doing any good? Don't know. Wake up in the night. Are we actually moving the needle? Don't know. Am I actually making a difference? Don't know, because this kind of work is collective, and often you don't have nice, neat milestones on the journey when you're trying to make a big difference. So there are 5 things, finishing now, that I would like you to hold in your minds when you're thinking about this way of work. And this is something that I think is important. Number 1, hold competing perspectives in your mind simultaneously. Don't get upset if you feel that there are 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different answers to an issue. Hold them there. Don't get troubled. Secondly, look at the big systems as well as the little pieces. It's not enough just to deal with the little pieces. You've got to look at the big. Thirdly, feel the pace and rhythm of the systems in which you're working. Be a disc jockey. Try to work out what the tune to play to get everybody dancing in the next 15 minutes might be. If you can get into that way of working, you don't end up with that terrible problem of interacting with people and finding that they're just, don't understand you. Fourthly, every system behaves differently in a different environment. I mean, you all know that. You all know it, those of you who work in health, you know that if you go to one health centre and go with the same program, and you go to another health centre with the same program, it will be different in the different environments. And these vertical programs where they try to standardise everything, again, as David said earlier, are a bit of a disaster, because they actually behave as though the environment doesn't matter, but it does. And then fifth, don't meet people where you think they should be, meet people where they really are. That was the beauty of the discussion we had about tuberculosis earlier today, and which Bertie set up so well. The whole focus was on actually the person who is ill is the centre of everything. Meet her or him there. So my own journey ahead is partly influenced by big international meetings, climate meetings, biodiversity meetings, food meetings. But I thought when I was finishing, actually, that's not what I really believe. I think these big global meetings are important. Get a lot of people coming together, and you feel as though you're shifting the needle. And certainly I am pleased that more and more leaders are saying there is a climate emergency, or there is a planetary emergency. It was agreed by the European Parliament yesterday, I think, yesterday. And yes, the future has to be a decarbonised future, and it is so urgent, so urgent. The planet is heating at an accelerating rate. A paper appearing in Nature today says of the 14 serious planetary boundaries that we've got to look out for, 9 are already either crossed or nearly crossed, ice melts and the like. So this is so urgent, and we mustn't lose sight of that. But also, actually, we've got to bring nature back into our lives, nature back into agriculture, nature into urban planning, nature into infrastructure. The future is not simply pretending that living systems and nature are not part of the world we want. In fact, they are key to the future. But the way we do this is combining the local and global, combining all nations and all people. Forget that developed country language. It's not real. Every nation has bits that are poor and bits that are rich, people who are deprived and marginalized and people who are super wealthy and well off. Every nation. So that means working at community level, working at local government level, working with businesses. Do not shut the businesses out. Some business leaders have much more to offer for the future than an awful lot of government leaders. And do not believe that simply focusing on making yourself feel comfortable will solve anything, because this requires collective energy by all of us like never before. Not just in this room, but by hundreds of thousands of people next year, by millions of people the year after. It's the only way. It's the only way to make the Sustainable Development Agenda come to life. And that to do that, you have to connect beyond your comfort zone. Forget the Facebook group. Forget it. It's no good. It's an echo chamber. Get out and meet and work with people that you would not normally meet and work with. Whenever I go to meetings and there's networking, I say, talk to 10 people that you otherwise wouldn't talk to. Forget your shyness. Just do it. You will discover through connection opportunities that you didn't know existed. And you have to be multi-stakeholder and interdisciplinary. I want to try to erode these terrible barriers between academic disciplines. Certainly in my job at Imperial College, I'm trying to do that. And intergenerational. Thank goodness there are people here who I suspect are around a third of my age. Great. You should be the people who are telling us what you want for the future. Because it is people-centered. It is political. Take a political position. Make sure that when votes are cast, they're cast for actually people who look as though they're going to govern for the future rather than for the present. Govern for the 12-year-olds rather than the 72-year-olds. Be brutally honest. And most importantly, be stubbornly optimistic. LIL, I learned it in Liverpool. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, Dave.
Your ideas.
I mean, I'd like to thank David for a fantastic and incredibly thought-stimulating talk. We've got about 5 or 10 minutes for questions, so maybe just get the lights up a little bit, and I think there are microphones roving around the room, because I'm sure many people are still trying to absorb that, but also have got questions about it.
Was it, just out of interest, was it recorded?
I think it has been, has it, Danielle? Is that right? All these been recorded? Yes. Yeah.
So we'll be able to see, I'll be able to check whether
it's made sense.
Whether it made sense,
Yeah. John, yeah.
Well, just
It's just behind
to
you.
kick it off, David.
My former guru, he's still here.
Not
And
at all. If you were starting again, what would you do differently?
John said if I was starting again, what would I do? I just have to say, Edith Piaf's song, Non, je regrette rien. I think that I have been so privileged to be in position after position where I've been able to learn and then apply, and learn and apply, and to have mentors like Kenneth Newell, who I mentioned, like John and others, who encourage me to connect and be courageous. So I would have done this. I mean, I'd like to have had the courage, John, to have been teaching systems leadership a bit earlier, because I think it's useful. But then at the same time, I had to do it and feel it. So yeah. But I mean, I'm not going to ask you now, but if we get a chance later, I'm going to ask you that question as well.
Over by Claire at the back, yeah. So
David,
yeah,
so nice to see you again.
Right.
When you used to come to WHO from DFID, I used to listen to you and I said, he's a health philosopher. And you are a philosopher. Right? And
But is philosophers practical or is philosophers just
very
theory?
practical, that's what I said.
Yeah.
And we came to know each other when you were working in WHO in Geneva, right? And it's so nice that you said that public health leaders must know the politics of health and political economy, right? Now tell me, what you're going to do, what will be your tactic? Because high fructose concentrated syrup coming from corn, from Iowa, and nobody wins a president without Iowa's vote, and it's everywhere, and this sugar-induced obesity epidemic, and NCD is coming out, right?
Yeah.
And then president is saying climate change is not his something he can do. How you're going to convince them?
Right. So people often say to me, aren't you thoroughly depressed that it looks likely that President Trump will win in 2020? And I say, well, he may. And yes, I'm disturbed when people who seem to be working in an absolute opposite direction to what I want are in leadership positions. But I've always believed that power is with the people and that the people will, in due course, be able to make shifts. So, what to do about food? Consumers. Consumers will make more and more choices. Secondly, producers. Farmers are not going to go on just producing stuff that they know is likely to have difficult markets in the future. We already see signs of that with the dairy industry really having to contract and pull back and probably going to be out of business. And I think, thirdly, governments are going to stop subsidizing sugar or subsidizing maize. We're seeing that from many emerging countries. Most countries are not listening to what's happening in America. They're looking at what's happening in their own borders. Indonesia is, Brazil is, India is more and more, China is, because these shifts are happening. So, I mean, I'm just looking and I'm saying the shifts are happening, and just because we see retrograde action in one large economy doesn't mean all is lost. I agree it makes life difficult, but that's why we're doing what we're doing. I mean, we wouldn't be doing it if it was easy. But we'll talk about it more afterwards, Munir. Munir, when in WHO, was always the guy who would ask the really tough questions when you were at staff meetings. So it's great that you haven't changed. Excellent.
In your questions,
Ma'am.
Yeah. Just
Sorry.
That's fine.
What do you think will be the next technical innovation that will help our future regarding public health, or more especially food security?
Right, the next technical innovation. Gosh, I mean, I just say straight away that for me, seeing the power of apps that enable people to, first of all, get diagnosis when they are perhaps a day away from a health centre are really wonderful. And I'm watching more and more examples of that, with people being able to photograph lesions and be able to send them and get an opinion. So I think the whole IT revolution affecting both health and food and agriculture is really important. But honestly, I actually think that more important than technical innovations, what's your name? Manon. Manon, more important than technical innovations are organisational innovations, way we work. So for me, the thing I want to see more and more is universities that actually advertise courses in leadership that are not structured according to separate disciplines. I want to see opportunities for young people to be actively involved in global decision making, like the 700 that came to New York for the Youth Climate Summit on the 21st of September, where I was at. That's the kind of innovation I think really matters. They're not so much technical, they're more organisational, and the politics of organisation. So partly what I'm doing here is, I'm not so much talking to David. I mean, he's a little bit hands tied because his thing's called the School of Tropical Medicine. But I do hope that there will be lots of discourse between the people working on health, in food, and in other aspects of human endeavour. So that was my answer to your question.
Bertie.
Bertie.
So, David, a really inspiring talk and much needed optimism. A couple of things struck me, though, that made me feel less optimistic. One of them was, you said we need to involve business, and
Yeah.
I see yes. But I see a gap between the primary producer and the consumer. And increasingly, I'm concerned about this concept of commercial determinants of health. And if you think about how long it took for us to make the journey from smoking to non-smoking, in the same way, in the countries where I work now, I see the commercial determinants, the non-nutritious foods, they have a massive impact. And I worry whether you get any sense. My question is, in this big dialogue, have you managed to include business in a way that moves beyond that commercial imperative, which at the moment seems so destructive?
So Bertie has asked me the horrid question. I was hoping it wouldn't come. You see, here it is. In smoking, the tobacco industry was really bad and fought against the public health community, lobbying governments. And have we got the same happening in food? Are the commercial food companies just ignoring all the nutritious information we've got about obesity, ignoring the information we've got about type 2 diabetes, and just insisting on going on pumping out their stuff? I don't think so, Bertie. They want to be around for another 100 years, whether it's Mars or Unilever or Nestle, and they know that they're not going to be able to get away with just simply promoting really damaging stuff to people. But the question is, what are the additional bits of pressure we can put on them while still talking to them so that they know they have to change? And that's where I think the work that's happened in the WHO through the nutrition group that's really identified malpractice by certain companies, calling it out has been really useful. That's where having citizens' action groups, including in Southern Africa, who are really taking on the large food companies, has really created an environment where they know they have to change. So it has to be working on multiple fronts. You've got to, in my view, you need the strong civil society pressure. You need really powerful action from public health professionals. You need governments to be beginning to wake up to the reality that their hospitals are beginning to fill up with people with complications of diabetes, and they've got to do something about it. And then to find the food leaders who want to change. It won't be all of them. And the rule that I'm working on is that if in a community of 100, 20 of the main leaders are ready to change, that establishes a new norm. So I want you to keep an eye on me. And if you feel that I've gone soft and I'm cozying up to business too much on food, come and give me a good kicking. Because I think, and the kicking, the reason why I'm asking Bertie to do it is that he was a week ago, I can't remember where you were a week ago. Malawi. He was a week ago in Blantyre, and you will see what's really happening. And sometimes we don't see it because we're sort of in comfortable boardrooms. So all of you need to be part of the global witness of where there is badness, and then you need to come to people like me who have the ear of CEOs and say, look, David, that company is still promoting baby breast milk substitutes in a really unacceptable way. Or this company is still pumping out highly sweetened and sugared fruit drinks or sodas, completely disregarding health, and put us on the spot. That's how we have to work. That's why I talk about this networking. We all have to be with each other on trying to make it happen. I hope that's, I know it's probably not totally satisfactory, but it's a bit of an answer.
I think we probably need to call this to a close now, but David will be around now for the drinks, and I'm sure people can talk to him now. So David, it's a real privilege to hear you talk.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry I was a bit long-winded. So oh, it was gone now. The email address that was up there, please don't hesitate to write, okay?
I'm delighted to give you the Leverhulme medal.
All right.
Thank you very much indeed.
This is it. Can I open it?
That's open it, yes.
I'm just going to tell you what it looks like. There it goes. Leverhulme, okay? Here it goes. Lever Brothers. Does anybody know what they did? Soap. And they are the people who founded this company, Unilever. Unilever is probably the most sustainable of the big multinational companies operating in food. They are cool. And so I'm super proud to receive this medal, because I think it's also a bit of a testament to somebody who started early on actually with this global approach.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Indeed.
Fun. Yeah.